there's, scandalous kind of stuff about the saxophone, as one would expect. But, for example, like composers literally being paid off to not write for it, death threats on Adolf Sachs trying to blow up his workshops multiple times, the usual.
That's the saxophonist Nick May. I'm Jamie Green, and this is Trading Fours. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Trading Fours. I hope you're doing well. It's a beautiful, sunny November day here in Kansas City. And I've got Nick May, the great saxophonist here in Kansas City, as today's guest. But before we get started, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. I could really use your help growing this podcast. I put in the show notes the subscribe link for both Apple Podcast and Spotify. So do me a solid, if you could. Go down, click on the link, subscribe. It helps. And I appreciate it. Also, if you're digging this podcast, go on Apple Podcast and give me a review. That also drives more people to it. This is a labor of love. I'm not making any money off of this. But I think these conversations are really good, and I think they're interesting, and I would love for more people to hear them. It continues to grow, but I'd like it to grow more. So thanks for that. Okay. Back to actual interesting stuff. So, I can't believe it's been over a year on this podcast, and I finally got a saxophone player on. And not only a saxophone player on, a really good saxophone player. And I think it's really interesting. When you think about saxophone in Kansas City, you're probably going to think Charlie Parker instantly, and certainly that's a big part of our history here. But the saxophone is a lot more diverse than that, as you're hearing right now. The saxophone can be a classical instrument. And today's guest, Nick May, he does both, man. He plays a classical saxophone, he plays a jazz-type saxophone stuff. He can do it all. And in this case, he's doing the soprano saxophone, which is a beautiful instrument. And he literally actually sacrificed his soprano saxophone to make it better so he could play a song. And we're going to talk about that as part of this interview. So, really excited to have Nick on, and no, not just because he's from Nebraska, although that's cool. I was just really excited to have Nick on because he's really good, super nice guy, very talented, and he's working hard. He's woodshedding as we're sitting here on the sidelines. So I'm about to sit on the sidelines too. I had my last outdoor gig, I'm thinking of 2020, most likely, although I've been put on standby a couple places. If we get one of those weird, super warm winter days, we will be out, Thunder Jacket, playing another live show because, I love playing live music, man. It's a lot of fun. But let's get back with Nick. Let's have fun. Let's get started. Here's my conversation with Nick May. Well, Nick, thanks for joining me. I've been asking almost everybody this, and I'll ask you, how you holding up with 2020, man? It's a crazy year for musicians.
Yeah. We're hanging in there. All things considered, it's pretty dark, but, I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, metaphorically speaking, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Honestly, what's crazy is this last weekend, I was actually up in Lincoln, Lincoln, Nebraska, and I actually heard a friend playing music live. And honestly, I was taken back for, a split second, because I think that was the first time I've actually heard live music since, January or February.
Yeah.
And the spirit of that was amazing.
Yeah, it's so, it's such a cliche, but it's true. You take things for granted until they're gone. And the idea that you wouldn't go out and see live music or perform live music, we went from, I was playing 2-3 times a month to nothing. And it's just kind of crazy that just when it goes away, and then you lose all your friends doing it, and certainly national acts doing it, and it's just such a huge hole. So I totally get that. But yeah, hopefully a light at the end of the tunnel, and things are getting better. So yeah. Let's back up a little bit, and people are probably going to roll their eyes that know me, but I honest to God, I booked you before I knew that you were a native of Lincoln, Nebraska, which is my hometown. But let's start there, because all the cool people come from Nebraska. So tell me about growing up, man.
So I mean, yeah, no, little Nebraska boy. Like, actually, fun fact, most people don't know this. I actually grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere that no one would guess that, right? Um, and grew up there probably until 13, 14 or so, but it was always on the outskirts of Lincoln. And then we moved actually into Lincoln. Family and I, we moved into Lincoln. Went to high school there. Went to my undergrad there. Um, and then just always kind of go back and forth just because that's where home is.
Yeah, it's not a bad trip. It's an easy 3 hours. So
Yeah.
I mean, I've done it like 5,000 times.
Yeah.
My
Well.
my older son is a freshman at the University of Nebraska right now, so I'm doing it even more. So,
Yeah. And
um,
I mean, it's not that bad of a drive, and even you know, I mean, it's at least when the interstate's actually open,
yeah,
like
not underwater.
a little bit more tolerable.
So I can't believe I'm saying that. I mean, my podcast is called Trading Fours, and I have been on for a little over a year. And obviously, it's probably some bias. I try not to be biased since I play guitar. But you are the first saxophone player, and that's just a crime that a podcast called
Yeah.
Trading Four in Kansas City would not have a saxophonist on for over a year. So I apologize. So saxophone obviously is one of the coolest instruments out there, and it's such a part of jazz. So let's start a little bit about that. What made you pick up the sax?
Oh, okay. So back in like fifth, fourth grade, or whatever, when the public schools introduce musical instruments after the desolate year for quarter, right? Um, Ironically, I didn't really care. Like, I was pretty much indifferent in the sense, I didn't really have a strong urge to play. It wasn't like the saxophone was calling me, and the love out the instrument didn't, call me for that. I actually wanted to play, I believe, trumpet. That was like my first, on the sheet, you like make your first pick, what you want to try. And fun fact, I couldn't buzz my lips. And that's kind of important when you play trumpet.
Yeah.
So they basically was just like, well, anyone can play saxophone. Basically, here you go, have fun, come back next week. And, it's kind of went from that.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, and I was, and I'll be honest, I was awful. Like,
Everybody is when they start.
well, yeah,
That's
like,
yeah.
I was like even like the last chair worst of the whole in the whole band.
Did you get challenged, Nick? The mean kids challenge you and make you go down a chair.
Well, yeah, they did that, and I didn't know my scales, and I didn't, I couldn't read the music, and it was just,
People, so a little band nerd thing. So if you're in marching band or concert band or whatever, and this is a million years ago, but when I
yeah,
was in school, that was the big deal, that if you thought you were better than the person next to you, you would
yeah,
challenge them.
yeah,
And they would put you in like the room with like all the instruments were stored. So the band director couldn't see who was who. And they would, shout out number one, play whatever. And then if you won, you got to go up a chair. So this is your band nerd competition for folks that aren't aware about it. It was like, people took that stuff really
yeah.
seriously.
It's like life or death, and like, I mean, I also didn't care at that point. And I didn't really, I'll be honest, I really didn't start really caring or even like practicing like heavily, probably, or at all. Like, let's just say practicing at the start, that's an improvement in itself, until probably either like eighth or ninth grade, I would say. So about 3 or 4 years after even just starting. And ironically, that was kind of had to deal with one of those challenge things that you mentioned, because obviously I was, last year the worst, right? And this one person who was first at the point, basically like was challenging me in the sense like the solo contest, like the yearly solo contest, right? Basically saying, well, I don't know why you're even submitting to do a solo contest, whatever, like piece, because you're gonna just get like a whatever the arbitrary failing grade is, and I'm gonna get a whatever the superior is, whatever. So
Right.
you might just quit while you're ahead. And I don't know why. I don't know what specifically changed in that instance, but for some reason, just something like that spark that just got lit. And I was like, okay, no, like that's not how this works. You can't tell me what you know what I can and cannot do. And then I did this, this miraculous thing called practicing, right? uh, and then come day of the solo contest thing, whatever. Um, we all do the go through the whole charades, whatnot. And at the end of the day, it was just hilarious when the band director was like announcing all the results. Uh, and they said like I wasn't even like they didn't even say anything about me. I was like, oh crap, I was probably the worst. Like that's why. Um, and then I remember basically they stopped and it was like, and ironically like Nick has one of the top scores of the whole site on this day. And like the look on his face when he was like, "What the you know what I mean?"
Right. So that guy, that either boy or girl, I don't know who it was that did it, them being kind of a jerk to you was a great impetus for you.
Yeah, ironic. I mean, it wasn't anything new, but I
It
think
had
it was just,
enough.
yeah, I had enough, and it was like, okay, you know what, we're done with this.
Right. That's funny. Well, and I think it's a good point, and then we'll move on. But I think this is true of everybody, and obviously this, and all musicians know this. So much of being a good musician, and it's not all. You have to have a good ear. Like I could have practiced as much as Michael Jordan. I would not have been Michael Jordan. I mean, so you have to have natural ability and stuff, but a lot of it, the majority of it, the vast majority of it, it's hard work. It's putting in the time and doing the stuff that you don't want to do, and it's the focus practice stuff that makes you a better player, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So that's interesting. So you were getting good and then liking it and enjoying it. So who were your influence? Who'd you hear on sax and like, I dig that dude, or I dig that woman, and I want to be able to do
Yeah,
something?
no, I think I'm trying to think of like the first. I remember the first, at least jazz recording I listened to was Lester Young with the Oscar Peterson Trio. That was the first one I've ever heard, and that was, I've never heard any, little barely teenagers never heard anything like that, right?
Yeah.
And then I guess classically, I'm trying. I think the first actual like classical saxophone, quote unquote, that I heard, I think was just like a YouTube recording of like either Marcel Mule, which was the basically French grandfather of all things. Um, yeah, I think I don't actually remember that to be honest.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Lester Young because he was a Kansas Citian.
Yeah,
He was here. Kansas City, what a great town for jazz overall. And then you talk about great sax players. I mean,
yeah.
you get Lester Young and Charlie Parker. And I know there's others that my brain is freezing right now. But what a cool time. Wouldn't you love to go back in time and see
Oh
some of
God,
those jam
yeah,
sessions?
yeah. No, that would
Right.
be amazing.
I mean, the story is, and I don't know if it's true or not, since we were just talking about Lincoln, was that Charlie Parker actually, they were driving on a gig up to Lincoln from here, and they hit a chicken on the road, and he said stop, and because they wanted to eat it, kind of thing, and they called him Yardbird because of that. Like Charlie wants a
Yeah.
Yardbird, and that's what made him Bird, which is kind of cool.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that. I've never heard that one.
Yeah, well, we'll see if it's right or not.
Yeah.
Somebody'll send me a nasty message if it's wrong. So obviously then you went to UNL, and were you a major in music, or did you just play on the side? How
No, yeah.
serious did you get?
Yeah, no, I majored in saxophone performance. All 4 years did both classical and jazz. I was in the top, all the groups, playing as much as I can. And I had a really good experience at UNL. I got a few different opportunities to study with some different people that most people probably wouldn't have ventured out to. For example, like I studied not like I obviously studied saxophone all 4 years, right? But the last 2 years, I studied with one of their resident string quartet artists, so on violin. I was playing saxophone, saxophone. I was playing saxophone music, right? Violin music on saxophone with a violinist, and that I think that shaped me a lot more, or that influenced me a lot, kind of where I'm at today. Um, studying, because that, I mean, that's kind of the core music that I traditionally play at this point, is the violin repertoire. Um,
So it's like Vivaldi, Nick. What do you lean toward? It's a violin.
yes, yeah, no, like right now I'm actually working on my second CD, which is going to feature Mozart, Vitali, which is a Baroque composer, Brahms, and then the Franck Violin Sonata. So those are all like heavy, kind of the heavy core pieces in the repertoire. Um, but basically, anything's really fair game. I mean, I wouldn't say I single out one over the other. Um,
Because
but
when was the saxophone created? I know it was the was it Adolphus Sax? What was the guy's
yeah,
name?
Adolf Sax.
And that
And
was later. So most of this classical music, because part of the reason of this podcast is I kind of try to demystify music for people that, are
yeah,
just kind of like, but like, how does things work? So saxophone was developed in the 1800s, correct?
yeah, mid 1800s.
So most of this music was written long before that. So as a saxophonist, you didn't have the opportunity. Nobody was writing music for you because your instrument didn't exist.
Well, that, and also, there's also the scandals that, that it goes to, oh yeah, there's, scandalous kind of stuff about the saxophone, as one would expect. But for example, like composers literally being paid off to not write for it, death threats on Adolf Sax, trying to blow up his workshops multiple times, the usual,
So
right?
why did they hate it so much?
Because, well, I mean, it makes sense in a sense. Like, if you're, I mean, in the 1800s, we didn't have, mid 19th century, we didn't have, all the core companies. Everyone kind of made their own instruments, right? So you didn't have the big Selmer, Buffet, Yamaha. They were all kind of just the local town repair music person, right?
Yep.
Um, and then you have, and I guess kind of backstory, Adolf Sax, his father was a repair music instrument maker. And they said he made really good flutes and clarinets at the time. So he learned that already. So he's a second generation instrument maker. Um, and so he was a very special child, and all, very different meanings of that. He swallowed arsenic, blew up gunpowder in his face, got hit in the head with a
Lord.
round, like fell down, like you name it. He should not have lived. Like,
I'm about to read a book about him now.
it's great, but I mean, if you think about it, and we go back to when he invented the saxophone. If you look at the old, original, the original made ones, they don't look really much any different than the modern ones, except they're a little bit. The modern ones are more shiny and has maybe a few extra keys, but the whole overall conception and design are pretty much the exact same.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you compare that to the flute, right? The modern flute and the prehistoric flute, that they're completely different instruments. The original clarinet and modern
Guitar
clarinet.
changed
So
dramatically.
yeah, so if and you enter the market with a fully functional, you know, almost perfect instrument that does not need years and years of trial and error, of course you're going to be pissed off. If you're one of his if you're one of the competitors in the instrument manufacturing field.
Right.
So, and in his clarinets, he also perfected the bass clarinet. So the bass clarinet, before he fixed it acoustically, it was pretty much like a giant clarinet. But now, that's why it has the brass bell, and it has kind of the same resemblance to the saxophone, and it's kind of shaped because same guy.
Interesting. Well, that's why I do this podcast. I learn something all the time.
Yeah.
So I did not know.
But yeah,
I knew a little bit, but not all. Didn't know about the arsenic. Didn't know about people blowing things up. Didn't know about any of that.
But yeah, no. So like the other instrument company, people, like literally tried to hired hitman to try and kill him, trying to burn up his design, steal his designs. No one could replicate it. And literally paid off composers to not write for it, or else they would have their they're artists, they're people playing their instruments, basically uh, boycott the orchestra and not play.
Right.
So if they're between their whole woodwind section and one saxophone, what are they going to choose?
Right. So
You know what I mean?
do you mostly prefer classical and then some jazz? Are you 50-50? How do you break it down?
Well, so in terms of preference, or yeah, no, in terms of preference, I would say 50-50. What I actually end up doing, and or I guess was doing before,
Yeah.
you know, it was probably closer to 80% classical and then just 20% jazz, just because I have complete and utter respect for all the weekend troopers, who do the 9 to 2 a.m. gigs, every you know um, that's just not necessarily my main uh, mo, for lack of a better term, right? So I usually, like, what I've done in the past in terms of in like the jazz field, like I usually do more, like I'll come in for like a special concert, like there's you probably remember First Plymouth in Lincoln, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we used to do like a jazz service, gospel jazz service, once or twice a year, go up for things like that. Was a guest artist with Baker University's jazz band and combo last year. So things like that more often than not.
Okay.
Uh,
You're just not going to be at the Balloon Room at 1:30
no,
playing bass, right?
that's past my bedtime. Like,
Well, dude, you're young. Wait till you get to be my age. You're going to be really. I mean, I was so thrilled. We played because we were only doing outdoor gigs to be safe. I won't do an indoor show, and they're like, could you do 6 to 8?" And I was like, "Oh God, 6 to 8, that's perfect. I'll be home and on
yeah,
the couch, hanging out, watching a movie with my wife at like 9:30. That's like I could be in bed at 10, my usual time. That's perfect. So
yeah,
I get that. So that's great. So what was 2020 going to be like, Nick, if you hadn't had the entire world kick
yeah,
off?
yeah. Well, leading up to 2020, I was doing a lot of a lot of guest artist stuff, more on the classical side around the country. And obviously a lot of that got canceled. A lot of I was going to be doing a bunch of traveling for that. Um, Missed a few orchestral concerts. uh, Trying to think if I missed anything. I mean, I don't want to say it, but in a sense this was actually kind of, I don't want to say it's nice, but maybe it's trying to find the silver lining. Kind of going back to what you were talking about, because this has actually given me a chance to just practice like hours upon hours that I wouldn't have normally had.
Yeah.
And especially the first 2 months of quarantine when everything was just on kind of standstill. I haven't had time to practice 4 or 5 hours, consistently since I don't know when, and it was it was great. I mean, obviously, missing all the social interactions and concerts and whatnot, but just being able to sit down and kind of get to work, that I actually enjoyed it. And I know, yeah,
And you're not the first person to tell me that.
really,
I've had Jackie Myers. You know Jackie, right? She told me the same thing. That just you have so much going on that you just can't put in the practice you want to because you're either performing or you gotta. I mean, you gotta make money. You
yeah.
gotta make a living. So having that, and then I don't know. You're way too young to know who this is, but there's a guy named Roger Manning who's a keyboard player who was the keyboardist in Jellyfish, which is one of my favorite bands from the 90s, and he's currently he tours with Beck, and
Oh wow,
he's played with all kinds of people, and he's like, I haven't had this time in forever, because he's
yeah,
probably mid 50s. So I get that, and I think it's one of those things that you have to put a positive spin on it, otherwise you're going to go crazy about it, right? I mean, you have to be like, I've got to make the most of this time. If I don't, then I'm really going to get sad. Be productive with it, do something with it. I
well,
mean,
yeah,
this podcast is an example, Nick, because I would have never done these on Zoom. I just wouldn't have, because I really like that interaction in person. And I really, was about, if you came in and you wanted to perform, I didn't say you had to. I don't want, it's not a monkey show. I don't tell people what to do. But if people would they wanted to come in and play a tune and talk or sing or whatever, I was all over it. And then obviously all that went away. And the positive part of it is then I've had national acts on.
Oh wow,
So yeah, I've had, besides Roger Manning, I've Neil Giraldo, who's Pat Benatar's husband and a phenomenal guitar. I've had him on, and I've had people in New York. I've had people in Seattle. I've had people, and that never would have happened if the
wow,
world hadn't shut down. Twofold: one, I wouldn't have thought of it, and second, they would have said no because they would have been touring or they've been doing something. They would have been way too busy. They would have been like, "Why am I going to talk to the schmo in Kansas City?" Right? But I know they're sitting around. I know they're not doing anything. So it's anyway. So that's the silver lining. I totally get it. So you talked a little bit about this new album. So tell me about your new album.
Um, so yeah, no, this is, it's a work in progress. Obviously, it's TBD with everything going on, but Maya Tuliva, she is a pianist and the owner of the Music Academy of Kansas City Warehouse. So that's where daytime job is, where I teach and do admin there. We've played together for probably the last two years or so. Um, and then basically we were just sitting, kind of mid quarantine, just okay, what do we do? And we're like, you know what, let's record an album, try and be productive, try and be proactive, and try and create something, good out of this, right? Um, and so, it was actually pretty easy picking what we wanted to do, because we've both played the Franck Sonata, couple, not 100 times, but at least a dozen times, separate collectively. But then we actually played it together uh, on our faculty recital. I think like 1 year ago, 2 years ago, something like that. So that's already a 30-minute. That's a 30-minute piece. So that's half an album right there. Um, and
That's
so then,
side one. If you had an album, we
oh
still had
yeah,
albums
yeah, or
anymore,
side
which we
one and a
don't. But
half. Yeah, exactly. And so, we just picked, kind of went around like, okay, what else would work well with this? What do we want to do? And so when we settled on that whole program, kind of the idea behind it is it kind of represents, you kind of get a little bit of everything without getting too cutting edge and modern, everything kind of up to that.
right.
Obviously, you have your Baroque, your 1700s, you have your Mozart, you have your Brahms, and then you have your Franck, which is super late French Romantic, leading up to the 20th century. You know, so right now we're thinking about recording it in uh, March or April, pending everything going on. Also pending if my instrument is actually functional by then.
What's wrong
Um,
with your instrument?
well, no, there's nothing wrong with it, but I'm for this album. I'm basically having a custom-made instrument made, because the saxophone doesn't fit the whole range of the violin. So uh, basically, what I'm doing to my soprano saxophone is I'm extending the lower edge of the lower range to fit the lowest notes of the violin.
Okay.
In its natural state, it doesn't, and yeah.
So soprano sax is what you're doing on this album, mostly not.
Yeah, that's primarily what I would say is probably my main saxophone out of all of them. Obviously, I have them all and play them all, but that's probably the most one that's home.
Okay.
Um, Soprano saxophone, it only goes down to concert A flat, and the violin goes down to concert G.
Right.
Right, and so basically, what you have to do is you have to cut off the bell of the soprano. There's one guy who makes this extension bell that has an extra key, an extra hole in it, that you solder on the hole, and then you add the extra key work, and then you have a low G.
Well, two thoughts on that. One, it sounds
Yeah.
expensive, and second, it's got to be a little bit of trepidation that you're cutting your instrument open, right? I mean, that's got to be a little.
Oh well, so I'm about this. This is a good story. So I'm about halfway through the process, because I bought a new soprano, this past year. Love it. And I was searching for like the one that I wanted to do this process too. And so I ordered the bell, ordered it from Germany. It's expensive, but it's not, it's not as expensive as you would think.
Okay.
Granted, that's not a high bar, but so I got the bell, took it to Will Peak, who is a local repair person who's very good, and I trusted with this project. And we got to the chopping part, and it was beautiful. Like when you see the picture of your baby just cut in half, part of you cringes, but it was as far as it could go. It was the most beautiful straight cut, and that's half the battle, right?
Right.
Well, the problem is because the soprano I bought is like a brand new 2020 release. The diameter is bigger than what the normal soprano size is.
Yikes.
So the bell that was made is more or less a one size fits all,
Okay.
and it did not fit all.
So then what'd you do?
Well, so
Besides cry.
oh yeah, in between. Uh, Basically, Benedict, his name's Benedict Eipelsheim, in Germany. He's in the process of making a new bell with a larger diameter to fit. So it's even like at double custom because we had to measure the actual diameter and all that kind of stuff. So this happened around like September, I think, early September. So I'm gonna be just tickled pink if I have this by the end of the year. I mean, I should have it by the end of the month. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, most people watch those home improvement shows, right? Where hey, they cut the window out and it doesn't fit and stuff. I think you're the first person I've had this story from an instrument, I'm always impressed when people can do that kind of stuff. I mean,
oh yeah,
I would not touch I have a bunch of guitars, and one of the ones I would like to have a drop D. So this is probably into the weeds, but basically if a lot of rock and roll I play has the low note's a D note and you want to drop it from an E to a D, and I have to tune it down. I have to tune it back
yeah,
up.
yeah.
They sell a thing that it just pops into place. And I've been like this close, like 3 or 4 doing it myself. And it's like, I can't I'm not doing it myself. I've got to hire, there's got to be a guitar luthier that I use, because I can't, if I ruin the guitar, then I'm out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Yeah. Well, do you want to see how the soprano looks right now?
I'll put it, and then I'll take a screenshot and put it up on the show notes so people can see it. This is fabulous.
Literally, when I say it's taped together, it's literally taped together.
It looks like my dad when he used to just use duct tape on everything.
So there's a 3D printed, I don't know how well you can see this.
Right.
Printed brace holding the tube together, and then it's taped on inside and all around just to hold it on.
Wow. That's fabulous. Well, before we go, I want to, I always think it's interesting. I want people to explore things, and obviously I want people to listen to you, and that's why I asked you for your tracks and stuff. And I'll put in the show notes, your website and all your places that they can find it, and they should listen to you. But the soprano sax, I think, unfortunately, and you may differ with me on this, but I think unfortunately the only thing Americans, if they think about the soprano sax, all they think about is Kenny G.
Yeah, no, that's about accurate. Yeah,
which is okay, but there's so much more stuff. So I would love for you to kind of give people some songs that have a soprano sax on it that they might be aware of. I'm thinking myself, there's some Billy Joel songs where his saxophone player used a soprano sax, right?
I know. I mean, in terms of soprano saxophone players that, if I had my way, and everyone automatically, would go out and just listen to, I would say they owe it to themselves to listen to Branford Marsalis, either stuff, or even when he was with Sting.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that was all him.
Yeah, Sting is Sting's a great musician. He's a great singer, fabulous songwriter. He's kind of just an okay bass player, but to his credit, when he went out on his own, he hired all these phenomenal jazz guys around him, which was really smart.
Yeah, and it's incredibly well done. I would say Branford. I mean that he is, and he is probably my idol in terms of just aesthetic and everything. But I would say Branford. If you want to go back in time, you have to listen to Sidney Bechet because he's basically the one that started it all.
Right.
You have to listen to Coltrane because My Favorite Things. Right.
I think most people probably know that tune, even though they probably don't think they do. I mean, that
They
was a
yeah,
hit.
they know it, but they don't. It's, kind of like, um, just kind of the, like the introduction to Beethoven's Fifth, right? Everyone knows the ba 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 bum. They just don't know what it is. They just call it the whatever
Bomb
song.
song, yeah.
Yeah, they call it that. Yeah, same thing, right? Um, and then kind of off the beaten path. I don't know if you've heard of Jane Ira Bloom
I have
or not.
not.
She's a New York soprano saxophonist, and she actually only exclusively plays it. So Branford, obviously, he does, alto, tenor, soprano, right?
Yep.
Coltrane, obviously, when everyone thinks of that, you think more of the tenor than soprano, right? But Jane, she, only plays soprano exclusively.
That's interesting. The Marcellus family is so interesting because I always would joke that I wish I would have been invited to their house for Christmas, like, because, the dad who very sadly just passed away from COVID, remarkable piano player. And I actually have his Christmas album, which is one of my favorite Christmas albums. It's just fabulous. And then you got Branford, and then you got, and then you got Winton. And there's another one that I'm forgetting.
Yeah. And
I mean,
then,
that just doesn't seem fair. That family is all that good.
Yeah.
But they seem like super nice people and stuff. Have you ever got to meet Branford or see him live?
Yeah, I met him once at a saxophone conference kind of thing, and we talked for probably 10-15 minutes.
How was that?
It was, part of me was, just nervous and scared, shitless, pardon my French. But, it's like you have your idol right in front of you, and just like, hi, you don't know who I am, and you probably don't care, but like, I'm your biggest fan, and you probably hear that every day. But
right.
But then,
he was cool about it.
Oh yeah, no, he was like, and then talk, just kind of got him on one of his philosophical rants, and that's always, I love those, because if you've listened to any of his, whenever he's speaking, once he gets going, it's kind of like Pandora's box. It's like, okay, but it's always great.
That's phenomenal.
It's always the thing that you don't want to say, but he'll be like, no, this is how it is.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's funny. So, Nick, I'm not going to keep you all day. So I really appreciate the time, and it's been really interesting. So people listening to this, what's the best way for them to keep track of what you're up to? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is it, I don't know. There's 3,000 things out there. What do you post the most? Where can people
I would say probably between Facebook.
Please come back.
Specific details, either Facebook, Instagram, website. I don't do Twitter. I know I probably should, but nah.
Don't do it, dude. Don't do it. No, it's not fun. It's just people being really mad at each other. Well, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. I will put in the show notes all those things. It's so nice to meet you. I wish it was in person, but virtually it's great. And when the world opens up, please let me know where you're playing and stuff. I'll come out and see it. And, anytime I can support a fellow Husker, they're not going to ever say no to that. So I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Nick May, everybody. I never thought we would have a attempted murder story on Trading Fours, but we did. I mean, how crazy. They tried to blow up Adolph Sax's factory to keep the saxophone from being popular. That alone made that podcast worth it. Nick's such a cool guy. What a great player. I mean, this is such a pretty, just beautiful. So I really appreciate it, getting to talk to Nick, and I put in the show notes not only how you can follow Nick, be sure to do that, but took a screenshot. I know it's hard when we're on Zoom and you can't see things, but I have a screenshot. There's a link to that in the show notes where you can actually see Nick holding up the saxophone that is literally taped together with some medical tape. It's fabulous. I just, it's funny. The things you do, man. The things you do to make it and to perform and to get better. So it's funny. So Nick, please let me know when it's fixed. I feel bad for you, brother. Let me know when you get that all, soldered back together and make it look all new again. So that's it for today's Trading Force. Hey, next time we're going back to New York City. I've got the jazz fusion guitarist Oz Noy. Oz has a new album out coming out November 20th called Snapdragon. Oz is fabulous. He's played with just about everybody you can think of. How about Mike Stern? How about Eric Johnson? My God, the list is so long. So be sure to check that out. That'll be on probably Saturday. Had a fun chat with Oz, and he's an Israeli-American, so he literally came here from Israel in the 90s to pursue his jazz dream, and he's done it, so that's very cool. So that's next time. But until then, go out and support live music, either in person or virtually, and I'll talk real soon. Bye-bye.